How many questions do we have here? I'll keep these people all day. Hi folks, J. Patrick Lemarr here, back to talk about All That Waits in the Night. You have questions. Anytime I put a book out, people ask me what it's about. They ask me, where the ideas came from, that kind of thing. There's always a ton of questions. So I ask a few people in my, personal chat, my group, to throw some questions my way. And then also I ask a lot of you on Facebook to throw some questions my way. I don't know that I'll get to every question that's asked. Certainly if I don't get to it in the video, I will try to answer it on Facebook as best I can. But we'll try to knock these out and see what we've got. And hopefully I can answer your questions without spoiling anything. That's my hope. All right, here we go. I wouldn't say my characters are influenced by anyone in particular. If they're influenced by anyone, it's, I think there's a bit of me in every character. When I'm writing villains, I'm always, I grew up in a great family with a lot of love, a lot of patience, and a lot of guidance. I had it really good as a kid. And so I know that not everybody is blessed like that. And I know that some people grow up really hard. They don't have a great relationship with their parents. And so when I'm creating a villainous character, I tend to think about what I would be if I didn't have the right influences in my world. What I would be if I didn't have my faith, if I didn't have my friends, if I didn't have my family. And I just tend to ask myself, what if? And that's kind of how that works. There are times when I base characters on people I know, usually not 100%, but maybe the cadence of someone's speech or their sense of humor or something I might draw from somebody that I know. I do tend to use names that I know. In this book, there's a few names of people that I know. And it's not because I base the character around them. It's just that I wanted to honor them by, I was using that name anyway or something close to it. And I just thought, why not name it after someone that I know? Why not name this character? And I like it when my friends can see their names there, whether it's because they helped me with editing or they, played another role in the production of the book. I like seeing other people's names alongside mine. And, I think it's fun, especially for younger folks. There's a couple of characters named after younger friends. I think it's fun for them to see their names in print. I feel like, I don't, if you're asking about, do I go back and read for pleasure? I would say no. The reason for that being that those characters live in my head anyway. They're always there, but also because I can be 6 months away from a project and try to reread it, and I'm going to feel devastated because I feel like I could write it better today. That's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's not me being too hard on myself. It's hopefully I'm always pressing to be better. Writing is, there's talent involved for sure. Some people have a natural talent for that, just like some people have a natural talent for playing the guitar. But writing is different in that there's a skill involved as well. When it comes to editing, when it comes to rewriting, when it comes to taking apart the pieces of what your talent put on the page and finding a way to make it better. The skill part, whatever talent is there is always going to be there. But the skill level changes constantly. I'm constantly learning new things. I'm constantly employing new tactics to make my stories better. So I don't reread a lot because I tend to look back and think, oh, I can do that better now. And I don't want to be the George Lucas of my books. That's no offense to George. Love you, George. But I don't want to go back and re-edit and refix and change things from the past to make them fit better today, my sensibilities and that kind of thing. I just don't want to do that. I don't think that, well, it would be a lie to say that my faith didn't influence what I write or how I write it. It certainly does. But I don't think it would ever keep me from writing horror. And I'll tell you why. Because horror exists in the world. Maybe not the kinds of horror that we read about in books or the kinds that we see in movies and TV. But there is real horror in the world. Slavery existed. Sex trafficking exists. There is horror and evil and wickedness in the world. And I feel like to turn away from that and refuse to talk about it gives it room to grow in the darkness. I'd rather point at it and go, that's scary, that's frightening, and whether that's straightforward or whether it's allegory or metaphor, not allegory. I don't usually do allegory, but you know what I mean. Whether we're talking about it without any filter, or whether we're talking about it through fiction. I think addressing the darkness that exists in all of us, that wants to find purchase in all of us, whenever we turn something into an us versus them, whenever we disdain the other for whatever reason, we're giving wickedness room to grow. And I want to address that. I want to look at the darkness, because when you know where the light comes from, I think there's no reason to fear the darkness. So definitely my worldview is at play in what I write. And that's a good thing. It's not a thing that I shy away from, but I also don't write for a Christian audience. So I'm not writing to just a specific group of people. I'm hopefully entertaining a lot of people and also giving them some things to think about. So I would never shy away from horror as a genre just because of who I am. I'm not going to write it forever. I certainly have written fantasy and other things. My upcoming Christmas book, The Christmas Cabin, is a feel-good, Christmassy, it's a great story, or a great set of stories, I guess I should say. But it's like I don't shy away from that, but I also don't shy away from the darkness. I write the stories that come to me. Real headlines. It's funny that you should ask that question, because I know that you haven't read this new book. There's a question about stories coming from real headlines. If you pick up the new book, you will read about that, and you'll see that this is an interesting question in that context. But I do not write anything from real headlines. I feel like the real world is scary enough, and I don't need to pull from that. Of course, character bits and pieces come from people that I talk to or run into or read about, or, everything's a hodgepodge of things that I've read or things that I've seen or people that I know. But I don't take any stories directly from anything that I read in a headline or anything like that. Now, when I'm researching in that mode for storytelling, I do tend to look at real stories, and sometimes an element of something real will work its way in. Prime example of that being the story Underneath, which is still available on Amazon. We'll put the link down there somewhere. But that particular short story is a horror story, and the character, the main setting for that story that the character finds themselves in is a mine in Pennsylvania, and there was a collapsed mine the name of the town escapes me, but it was a real story where this mine collapsed and this whole town has just sunken down, and they had to abandon the town because the whole mine caught on fire, and it just is still burning. The coal is just still burning under the town. And it was a hellish image for a hellish story, and I thought I've got to pull from that. So it's not the same town, but definitely the inspiration for parts of that story came from a real instance. But that's the only time that I can think of that I've used anything from the real world as a basis for anything. Time is my enemy, always. I tell people that, and I think time is everyone's enemy. Obviously, we never have enough to do the things that we want to do. As a dad, I give time to my family first, to my kids, to my wife. I put them first. I try to, run away for an hour or two at a time to get some writing done, to get some editing done. But as far as challenges to developing a story or a concept, it's less of a challenge for me because I've got more ideas than I have time. So time is really the enemy. When it comes to developing characters, it's always about finding their voice, finding out how they speak, and what they, what their position is, sort of in the story. There are times that characters surprise me. I can write a situation where I have a plan for how that situation is going to play out, and then the character zigs when I think they're going to zag, and that's because I give them free range. Once I know who they are, if I write out a scene and I might stop in the middle of it and go, that they would never say that. That doesn't make sense, and then I have to approach the material from a different direction. That's happened one or two times in different manuscripts, but yeah, for the most part, it's not a challenge to come up with story concepts. I've got dozens of stories still waiting to be told, and many that I've written that haven't been published yet. But it's time. Time is the enemy. Finding the voice for a character is, I've approached it differently for different books, depending on the need and depending on the story. When I first started writing, I would, as I created characters, I would write a brief description of the character, not a physical description. I leave a lot of physical description to you as a reader. I might give you a little something. I might give you the color of the eyes, or I might, give you that their hair is shaggy, or that they're in need of a shave or something. Like, I may give you something that puts something in your head, but I try to leave it kind of vague because I want you to fill that in. I want you to feel like you own that bit of the character and that you see them the way that you want to see them, largely. When it comes to, so what I would do back in the early days is I would write a paragraph, just like, this is who they are, this is where they've been, this is what they're after. And then I would write, a page of dialogue. I would take a scene that I knew was coming somewhere later in the story, and I would just write out some dialogue in order to get a feel for them as a character. And once I knew how they spoke, once I knew how they carried themselves in a conversation, I had a good sense for them and could write them well from that point on. Now I tend to do that kind of work in my head. Before I ever start writing anything, my brain introduces them to me, and I just sort of, it's more that I'm a backseat passenger, and the muse is driving the car. I say that, and people don't really have a frame of reference for that. Like, I don't decide what I'm going to write. The stories come to me. The stories grab me and throw me in the back of the car, and they take off down the road, and I'm just there writing down what I see. So usually it's the characters telling me the story. I'm just kind of paying attention and trying my best to tell it accurately, and then to clean it up and to tell it as well as I can. But yeah, it's been different for each project. These horror stories came from plot ideas first, and I didn't sit down and intend to have a 5-year-old protagonist, but you'll find one in this book. So as they come to me, as they introduce themselves to me, I just follow their story as best I can. I wouldn't say that I have a target audience. I mean, I guess depending on the work, I hope people that enjoy horror stories enjoy All That Waits in the Night. Although, horror is like heavy metal, right? It's a genre, but it's a genre that has many genres inside it. So horror to somebody could be ghost stories, or it could be slasher films, or it could be the Twilight Zone. I would say my book is more Twilight Zone. If you're squeamish about horror and your thought is, man, I would never read this because I don't do scary things. There are scary things in the book, but I don't think the scary things are the point of the book. And I think that it's much more of a nostalgic kind of horror, a Night Gallery, a Twilight Zone. It's much more in that vein. So I would say give it a shot, even if you're a little bit skittish about horror. But I don't really target a particular audience other than, hoping that whoever loves that genre will like what I'm writing in the genre. If I'm writing fantasy, if I'm writing horror. Age group, I think I labeled the Tales of the Evermore books as young adult fantasy, but it's only because I wrote them sort of simply. I wanted to make sure that middle school age and up could read it, but it's not that I was talking down to them, or it's not that I was writing down to a certain age group. I write the stories that I write, but because I hoped that I would find an audience of a broad group of ages, I didn't. I sort of labeled it young adult because a lot of adults read young adult, and I felt like that was the best way to maybe get the attention of younger readers. And I think middle school and up is fine for those. I think middle school and up is, or at least high school and up, is fine for All That Waits in the Night as well. Inspiration for this particular book. That's a complex question, aren't they all? It started off as a short story attempt to take advantage of a new digital platform, and the idea was that you would tell a serialized story, one large story, chapter at a time. And there was a limit of 5,000 words for each chapter. As I decided on what I would write, I had two ideas, and one of them was to tell a horror story. So as I started sort of brainstorming ideas for horror, every idea that I came up with didn't need a whole book to tell. They were shorter in nature. Some of them required more than 5,000 words, and so there are some two-parters in the book. But the main notion was... I decided to cheat. I talk about that a little bit in the preface of the book. I decided to cheat, and instead of telling a serialized story, a chapter at a time, I would tell a story, I would tell a larger story, one small story at a time. So everything in this book is connected. You won't understand how they're connected until about midway through the book, and then you'll understand what's happening. And then you won't get a resolution for that until much later. And then there are still some open-ended questions at the end of this book. Everything in my writing, whether it's young adult fantasy or horror or a compilation like Shadow Plays was in 2018, where there was a grab bag of different genres, no matter what I do, there are always connections. There are always little trails, little seeds, little Easter eggs that you can follow to see how these things are connected in a larger way to the world that I'm building. There are some questions at the end of this book. There's definitely an end to this story, but there are some characters that will want to know what happens to them next, and they'll pop up again in some other places. Maybe not in a horror situation, but they will definitely pop up somewhere else. But yeah, I feel like, for the most part, the inspiration was just, I wanted to tell some stories in that sort of Twilight Zone arena, that sort of vibe, and trying to make any of them a full book's worth of a story. They just didn't need it, and so I just decided the best way to do it was to cheat and tell a bunch of shorter stories that then connect to be a larger tale, which is kind of how my work works best anyway. Every story is its own story, but then there are connections, there are threads, and they all kind of connect together. So you never have to read everything that I write, but if you do, I think you'll see the connections, and that makes it fun if you're somebody who reads everything. So anyway, I think that's it. That's all the questions that we have now. If you have more questions that I didn't get to yours, you can ask it down below, and I'll try to answer it if I can, as long as the answer doesn't require any spoilers. Other than that, I hope that you enjoy All That Waits in the Night when it drops tomorrow, May 20th, on your Kindle device. If you don't have a Kindle device, you're waiting for the paperback. They are coming June 10th. If you live in the Sellersburg, New Albany, Jeffersonville area, and you're watching this, then we're having a book event on June the 10th at Mood Coffee Company in Sellersburg at 7 p.m. We're going to have books there. I'm going to be signing, we'll take pictures, we'll get to know everybody and spend time celebrating the arrival of the book. If horror's not your thing, I'll have all my other books there on the table as well. We'll also be celebrating my daughter's birthday that day, and so it'll be a big day all around. But yeah, if you're in this area, then for sure come out and participate in that event. Otherwise, I will let you know as soon as I have copies for you to sell in my store, or as soon as they're available on Amazon.com as well. Anyway, thank you so much for your time and for asking the questions and giving me the time to answer them, and for your interest in All That Waits in the Night. I appreciate every single one of you, and I hope you enjoyed the book. Until next time.